In this tutorial, we're going to talk about texture. Now, texture in art can mean a couple of different things. There's two different types of texture. There is something called tactile texture. And tactile texture is texture that you can touch. So for example, fiber art would be tactile texture. Sculpture would be tactile texture. Okay, so anything three-dimensional is going to have a tactile texture. The other kind of texture that we are actually going to talk about today is called visual texture. And this visual texture can be seen, but it's not physical. So for example, if I have a fuzzy duck stuffed animal, and I touch my fuzzy duck stuffed animal and I can hold on to it, that's a tactile texture. But if I have a drawing of my fuzzy duck stuffed animal, when I touch my drawing doesn't feel like a fuzzy duck, it only looks like a fuzzy duck. So that's an example of visual texture. Okay, so for this we're going to have a little bit of fun. You're going to take your hand and you're going to trace around just the outside. Doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, get it on there, fit it on there. You can kind of see there's my hand. Okay, so each one of these fingers, what we're going to do is we're going to practice drawing different textures. So for some of the fingers that we draw, I'm going to ask that you use specific colors, the same colors or close to that with the ones that I show you in my demonstration. I'm using only color pencils. So nothing crazy fancy, just regular plain old color pencils. So you could do this with any brand of color pencils you have. But my first finger, and again, it doesn't matter which finger, as long as you're trying out the same textures. For my first texture, I'm going to try and show some fur. So I'm going to make one of my fingers furry. So the three colors I'm using for that, I'm using a brown, a black, and a gray. So typically what you want to do is you want to work with your darker colors first and then work with your lighter, or you can work with your lighter colors and then add your darker. I think it depends on really what you're drawing and what you're comfortable with. I'm going to start with some of my lighter colors first. So when you're drawing textures, it's not just about the colors, it's also about the movement that you make. It's about the way that you're drawing. So you'll notice some of the strokes that I'm making for my fur, okay, are short and almost feathered at the end. I'm also varying my pressure a little bit, so I have some darker gray lines and I've got some lighter gray lines. My next color is going to be brown, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to layer right on top of my gray. And I'm varying my pressure as well. Notice I'm not coloring back and forth. I'm not just coloring things in, I'm actually drawing each individual hair. So I'm going to do the same with my black. And there's my fur. Now I could, if I wanted to, go through here with my gray again and add more gray if I felt like it needed it. Maybe even to fill in some of those white spaces that are left behind. So think of this as like seasoning food. Sometimes you add a little bit more at a time. Sometimes something needs a little bit more of something. So go ahead and add that as you see fit. The next drawing, the next finger that we're going to do, we are going to make this one look like a cactus. So I'm going to take two different kinds of greens here. I have a dark green and a light green, or like a red grass green, regular green. So I'm going to take my darker green. Now you could do this if you don't have a dark green and a light green. You can do this with a regular green and a yellow. It's up to you. Okay, so I'm going to make my skinny vertical lines. I'm keeping them very close to one another. But notice they're not perfectly straight. They've got a little bit of a curve to it because I'm drawing a cactus. I'm even going to outline my finger for this one. Now that was with my dark green. Now with my lighter green, I'm just going to come in and I'm going to very gently just color it in, very lightly. I think I might also add some yellow to that, just to kind of give it a little bit of a pop. So again, just kind of like if you're adding seasoning to food, add it a little bit at a time. Don't dump it all in at once. So then I'm going to go back with my dark green and I'm going to make my little spikes. Get as many in there as you'd like. You can, if you'd like, also add like a flower if you'd want to some of those. Some cactuses have little flowers on them. Okay, so there's your cactus. My next finger, I am going to practice drawing some brick. Now for this, you're going to need a brown and a red. And we're going to start by using our red, and we're going to draw bricks. Now when you're drawing bricks, you want to make sure that you draw each individual brick and that you offset your bricks. Because if you build a house with all of your vertical spaces, your house will fall down. So my brick and my mortar, leaving some space for my mortar. So now with my brown, I'm going to very lightly, I'm just going to color in the whole thing. Just super duper lightly. I'm not pressing hard at all. What this is going to do is fill in my mortar in between my bricks, but it's also going to give my red bricks a little bit of a darker red, so it's not so bright, so it looks a little bit more realistic. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to fill in each of my red bricks individually. And I'm actually going to go over these with my brown so it's not so bright. Now this next one, you can use whatever colors you like for your next one. I am going to use a blue and a violet, and I have two different blues here. I've got a darker blue and then I've got a lighter blue. So again, if you don't have a lighter blue and a darker blue, you can use whatever colors you've got for this. So I am going to make scales. So with my darker color, my darker blue, I'm gonna go ahead and make my scales. So this is kind of like the bricks, where you don't want all of your scales to line up. You want a little bit of a variety. So it looks like they have some overlapping. Okay, So then what I'm going to try to do is create sort of a gradient or an ombre effect. And so I'm going to start with my purple. And I'm going to color very lightly, just halfway down. And I'm going to take my lighter blue, and I'm going to start at the bottom. And then I'm going to lightly blend the two together. Notice again, I'm not pressing hard. I'm just adding my colors gradually. So then when the violet comes to meet the blue, you can kind of blend them together a little bit. Now you can try this with whatever colors that you'd like. If you find that you're starting to lose some of your scales, just go back over them and darken them up a little. You can even outline your finger if you'd like. Okay, so that's kind of how you do some blending, right? Bring the two colors together and then blend them sort of in the center. And last finger that I'm going to do, I'm going to try and make this look like wood. So for these colors, I'm going to use brown, I'm going to use yellow, and a little bit of black. Okay, so I'm going to take my brown first, and I'm going to make my wood grain. So I'm going to outline my finger for this. And I'm going to just do a little loop here. I'm going to come up and follow that through. So here's my wood grain. I want to color my knots, these little loops in with my brown. And then I'm going to go over it very lightly with my black, just so it's slightly darker. So it almost has like a dark brown look. Then I'm going to go through and I'm going to color everything in just lightly with my brown. And then I'm going to take a little bit of my yellow, and I'm just going to give it kind of a golden color. Again, I'm not pressing hard, just pressing very lightly. Okay, and then you just have your wood texture. Now another thing you can do, this is the strangest glove I think we've ever had. What you can do is you can pretend like your hand has been flipped over. And then if you notice in your palm, you've got some pretty significant lines. I think the older you get, the more lines you have. I've got a lot of lines on my hand. So what you can do is you can take your hand and you can look at the direction of the lines and then kind of try to copy them on your drawing. So I'm taking my brown, and I'm just going to draw a couple of lines just to make it look like my palm. You can even draw your wrist in here if you'd like. Got some lines on my wrist. Okay, so just a couple, you don't need a lot, just to give it a little bit of texture. Sometimes less is more. But in the end, you should have this really cool looking textured glove and your vocab up at the top. Hope this was helpful.